And realize. So again, my name is Chris Sims. I am the Chief Product Owner and CEO of Sagayo Studios. You've reached the Scrum Storytelling for Scrum People, Scrum Practitioners webinar. I cannot be more excited, and we've got some wonderful, just absolutely phenomenally talented people that are joining us that hopefully are still here. Tom and Park, if you want to go and get your cameras on, we will have you rejoin. We have people, literally a global audience joining us today. We've had people from the United Arab Emirates, from Germany, from Brazil, from Canada, Mexico, from Birmingham, Alabama, from Wetumpka, Alabama. And on our panel today, we even have an international flair. So I want to do some quick introductions here in a little bit and let you know who's actually here and what we're going to do. But just to kind of frame the goal for the next hour, our goal is to get through and talk about, there's actually a lot of content. One is going to be the importance of why we want to tell stories and why we feel this content is so important. Then we're going to talk about, and Tom as a playwright and as a director, talk about how to write a great and wonderful and compelling story. Park as an acting coach, going to talk about how you actually deliver that story and how can you connect and create empathy and compassion, and we're going to talk about that. And then I hope to draw it back and really kind of focus. Yes, I can absolutely shut off the music. I shut it off in my room, but not in this. Is that better? Give me a thumbs up. All right. At some point, I'll get a little bit better. This is a brand new computer that I'm working on. So my last one I had set up so that all the things were in the right place. This one, I'm working through all of that. So sorry, you were just listening to the official soundtrack of our Scrum training classes. So yeah, it's an interesting, we'll talk about how that is, but the goal for today is to really get in and talk about how we can build great stories and why they are so important. How do you craft them? How do you tell them? And this came from a lot of coaching I've done lately and really over a long period of time, in that so often I run into situations where people have to tell a great story. And that could be really uncomfortable a lot of times if we don't know the skills or have the skills to go do that. So Park and Tom are going to join us as panelists. They are experts in this. We'll do a more formal introduction shortly, but I do want to introduce two other people that you'll see on the line. They're two other additional members of the Sagayo team. We have Josh Bartlett. Josh has been with us for a little bit now. He's one of our training team members. He's helping facilitate and making sure that, hey, I'm shutting the music off. I'm keeping myself off mute. I'm not making those, boneheaded mistakes anymore. And we'll kind of help push that out on social media. And Amanda is our newest member to the Sagayo family. Amanda joins us is the founding director of Alabama's only LGBTQ outreach center. She's founding director of that. She's joining as our product owner of training services. So for the last 6 years, since 2014, you've been building that, and we're super excited to have her join the team as our product owner to help drive and build a more engaging product or training experience for all of the different kinds of training programs that we're building over the next. And some of it, you're about to experience a little bit of it. But Amanda, say hey to everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. We're excited. And thanks again to Park and Tom. This is incredible.
So with that said, I'm going to do a little bit more introduction, and then I promise Park and Tom, I will stop talking a little bit and give you space to share, because I guarantee you that the great content that y'all are bringing to the table is why we have as many people that are just so excited about joining and being part of this. But let's bring up just some quick introduction screens, introduction slides. So joining us first on the panel is Tom Salter. Tom is a playwright and director, and actually the only person that's ever got me to sing more than 5 times in a row. Tom is a director was a director for a play I was in at the Wetumpka Depot a couple years ago, and it was a award-winning play. We actually took it to a competition and made it through, and it was really exciting. And is one of the people that helped me understand how can we connect and tell a great story. So Tom has been telling stories for a while. Tom, you want to take just a little bit to introduce yourself?
Well, I guess my first story was in the second grade when I was tapped to be in a play because, as the teacher said, I talked more than anybody else in her class. But I'm very excited about being here today and being a part of this webinar, and I'm looking forward to sharing information with you.
All right. Thank you, Tom. And again, someone that can get me to sing as tone deaf. And I tell them I took a genetic test and it came back. And one of the things on there says I'm officially genetically tone deaf, which is an interesting thing they could tell.
You did a fabulous job, sir.
Well, it was great that actual particular character wasn't supposed to be able to sing.
That helped. It certainly did.
But yeah, no, if you wanted someone to actually, anyway. So that was a point when I was able to stretch myself, but that stretching myself in a lot of ways started with this guy, Park. Park I met at the Alabama Shakespeare Festival where I was able to take an acting class. So he was there. Park is currently joining us from London. And so he's got coffee though, not tea from what I told, but Park has been, he's an American actor, director, playwright, and also one of the first people that really made me truly stretch myself and be uncomfortable. I think at one point I told him that, I'm doing this so I can get better being in front. So I need to feel uncomfortable. And so he took me at my word. And there's this play. It was an off-Broadway play, Blackbird, pretty well known, famous. But in it, I'm taking the character of a, well, I will encourage you to go look up Blackbird. I did a scene out of that, and that was extremely uncomfortable. So I'll let you go look and see what that is. It's a phenomenal play, but it's also a really uncomfortable part to play. Mark, you want to do a little bit better introduction than I did?
Yeah. So I like Chris said, I am an actor. I am an acting coach. I'm a speaker coach. I have worked for TEDx over at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. Yeah, and I'm just looking forward to sharing some information, hopefully starting to build a mini toolkit for you to craft your own stories.
All right. So let's dive in. I'll go a little bit further. So let's like this. The format we're going to do, we do have a little bit of an outline or a backlog because of course we need one. So for those that don't know me, I'm an Agile and Scrum coach. I have been working in software development since I was in I actually wrote my first line of code in third grade. I started getting paid for it in sixth grade. I've had a paid position pretty much to manage or lead or coach software developers every year since. So believe it or not, and I know this is going to come as a really big surprise to everyone on the line, I was a little bit of a nerd growing up, and I was extremely shy growing up. But thanks to a lot of great experiences in my life, I've been able to go and coach some phenomenal organizations. I've worked with small startups all the way up to large Fortune 100 companies, working throughout different levels of leadership in those. One of 17 licensed Scrum Trainer Fellows in the world. That's a relatively new thing. We're actually announcing it formally this week. So that's been pretty cool to be able to go through that process and dive into this. And in that, I get exposed to a lot of different people that are trying to get good at connecting with people. So that's where a lot of this came from, is in my coaching. We're learning and we're seeing these stories, these questions, or these pain points keep coming up. So this is where this has come from. So quick, what our backlog is. We're going to talk about why storytelling matters. How do you craft a great story? How do you tell that story? Where does it fit in the world of Scrum? And then get into a little bit of Q&A time at the end. Given the time, this is a lot of content. The idea here is we're exploring if this is something that needs to be even more. We believe that this could very likely turn into a more full class over time. So we'll talk about what next steps are, but very quickly, I want to bring up this quote. It's one I've used a lot. Storytelling is the most powerful way to put ideas into the world today. Inside the Scrum world, we're about innovation and we're about creation. We're about putting ideas into the world. But a lot of times in a lot of the teams and organizations I go coach in, we focus a lot on the project management aspects of it, the product management, the refinement, those kinds of things, but we don't get into the very practical skills that are needed to create a great story. Because stories connect, stories bring life. And if you're a product owner, you're all about connecting people to connecting customers, users, and exploring their life and bringing those stories back to your team. If you're a Scrum Master, you're telling the stories that inspire your team to grow, to improve, to get better. But a lot of times we're not taught the skill of storytelling. So we're going to take a little bit and explore some of this through two of the most phenomenal storytellers, story writers that I've had the pleasure of working with that really made a big impact on where I am today, and get into that. So the first area we want to hit, and Tom is going to kind of drive this, but this is really meant to be a panel where we're going to be talking and having a conversation. So we'll go back and forth. If you have questions, please ask them. Bring up the Q&A panel. We'll be on the lookout for those to come in. And as they do, I'll ask them. We're going to start with crafting a story and take a few minutes to talk about what are the things to consider there. And then we'll jump over and talk about great ways of telling it and then wrap up. So Tom, why don't we kick off a little bit and tell us what you have for us?
Okay. A story, the definition of a story, I mean, you can look it up on Google or whatever, but in my view, a story is a narrative that's designed to communicate effectively an idea or to solicit a response of some sort. An excellent story relates to the listener. The listener can put himself or herself inside your words, inside your story, and it elicits an emotion. Now, we all know that memory is tied to emotion. Memory is tied to adrenaline, and when you tell a good story, a great story, then that emotion kicks in, and that also helps your listener, your audience, remember the story that you're going to tell. Over the years, the most successful people in business have used great stories to motivate their clients or their employees. I remember hearing Michael Dell, who was in April of 2020 was designated the 27th, I think, most wealthy man in the world. One day he told his group that they were in the fashion business. Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense because it's a technical company. They make computers and other, as a matter of fact, I'm talking to you today on a Dell. They make computers and other things. And he could have sent a memo out saying we need to look at our colors and we need to look at the design or something like that. But in saying we are in the fashion business, one of the things he did is he didn't limit his employees to specific parameters. He allowed them to start thinking outside of the old proverbial box. Storytelling brings emotion to the table. It helps you as a product owner or as a business person. It helps you communicate in a way that your people will remember and that your customers can relate to. When we look to stories to tell our story, so to speak, there are several things to remember. First of all, a good story has a structure. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And many times when you do your stories, if you were to chart it, it looks kind of like this. It kind of looks like a U. You start with a beginning, you outline the information, you set your goals, you reach a point where there's a turn in the story, where there's a conflict, where there's something that changes the direction of the story, and then it brings it up to your conclusion, to the goals that you're trying to set. However, a great story, and I am a terrible artist, but a great story is actually more like a circle. It starts at the beginning, it goes to the middle, you have your conflict, you have your resolution, and then it brings it back to the beginning. It brings it back to your original point. And that's something that takes a little practice. And we don't have enough time today to go into all the specifics of how you can structure that. But the main thing to know, first of all, is you have to know your audience. You have to know what the triggers are for your audience. Are the items, the things, the subjects that motivate them? Now, there's a pretty good chance that you think you know, but my guess is that you don't. People, if you're a leader in your company, sometimes you don't always hear the truth. You hear what your people think you want to hear, or maybe they're trying to put things in the best light always. But if you do your research, if you really get down and listen to your employees, listen to your customers, you can find what their true triggers are. And you want to try to appeal to those triggers as you are telling your story, crafting your story. You also have to know what your goals are, clear goals. And it's a mistake to put 25 goals into a single story. One or two are really all you can effectively produce. But you need to have those goals clearly stated in your mind in order for you to provide them to your listeners and to your audiences. But if you don't know what they want, then you can't reach that emotional point where they become part of that story. It's also important as you're getting ready to tell your story that you write it down. It can be a simple outline form, but it's important to have the information spelled out so that you don't stray. If you aren't sure exactly what you want to happen, then your audience won't be sure what you are asking them to do. So make sure you outline your story and make sure your goals are clear. You do that at the beginning. Billy Graham was a very famous evangelist, and someone asked Graham one time how he was so effective, and he said, I tell them what I'm gonna tell them, I tell them, and then I tell them what I told them. People need to hear the same thing more than once. You'll likely hear us talk about some of the same stuff over and over again today because it's important and we want you to remember it. But if you bring forth your idea early, reinforce it with your story, and then bring the story to an end back to your original idea, then that can be a very effective tool for reaching your audience and getting what you want as part of that. There are lots of great models out there for storytelling. I guess one of the most influential books of our history is the Bible. Now, it would have been easy if the authors of the Bible just sat down and wrote a list of rules. Okay, these are the things that you have to do in order to get to heaven, or whatever the goal would be. And if that had been the entirety of the Bible, the chances are it wouldn't have been very effective. Instead, it's a group of stories, and the stories communicate the idea. Even the 10 Commandments, which is a list, the 10 Commandments is it's wrapped in a story about Moses going up the mountain and all that other stuff. So in order to be effective, in order to be memorable, using storytelling is really important. You can overuse stories. Every time you get your staff together, you don't want to tell them a story. Sometimes you just need to talk about the color of the walls or whatever your goal is for that staff meeting. Save your stories for the things that are the most important in your business or in your personal life even. But using good examples, music, of course, music, most songs are mini stories. You probably have your own favorite song and it relates to you in some way, on some emotional level. It may just be the music, because the music can trigger the story, or it could be something that's part of the wording of the song. John Prine, who recently succumbed to the coronavirus, was a wonderful storyteller. One of my favorite songs is one of his called Paradise. And the first line is, when I was a child. That in itself, that first little phrase grabs your attention. It makes you think about when you were a child. When I was a child, my family would travel. That brings you back to all of your family travels, perhaps, when you were a child, to Western Kentucky, where my parents were born. The first line tells a story, and it draws you in. It brings you into his world, and it helps you to connect to what he's trying to say. So you can find lots of good examples of storytelling and use those as models for your own storytelling. It's important that you choose the right words. When you're talking about a car, for instance, it's not a red car. It's a bright red car. It's a cherry red car. It's a fire engine red car. You need to provide some additional descriptive language as part of your story to help your audience become part of that narrative. One of the wonderful things about words that, you've heard the phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, it's my contention that a word is worth 1,000 pictures. Because if I say dog, if I just say the word dog, in your mind, you have a picture of a dog. It may be a wonderful memory of a dog when you were a small child, of a Christmas present that you got, or a birthday present of a pet, or it could be a terrifying memory of being attacked by a dog or being frightened by a dog. But it doesn't I don't limit you to that part of the story. When I say dog, you bring your own image into that story. That can be very useful, but sometimes you need to control it. You need to talk about a sweet puppy with a wagging tail, and that brings up a totally different image. So choosing the right word is critical, or the right words are critical. Some people use humor in their stories. Most professional speakers start their presentation with a joke, because it relieves the tension, not only for them, but for their audience. And it also gives them a point of reference, a point of connection where they've connected over this story. Now, not everybody is funny. If you're funny, if you can tell a joke, then use humor. If you're not funny, then maybe you shouldn't use humor as part of your story. You should find your strengths and play to those strengths as a storyteller. I remember, though, that there was one time I was in a meeting with this guy who was an accountant, and he was as dry as the Sahara Desert. He was toast with no butter or jam. He was as plain as a bagel. I mean, that was Ron. But Ron got up and told a funny story. And because it was so out of character for Ron, the whole room erupted. It was a 5-minute laugh. It was incredible. So I'm not saying you shouldn't use humor if you don't consider yourself funny, but you should play with it a little bit and find the right story that fits your personality and that works with the triggers and with the emotions that you're trying to bring forth. Nowadays, especially with our current situation with the coronavirus, we have lots and lots of challenges to storytelling, because telling a story has audience participation, and the more audience you have, generally the better response you get. You can ask any comedian or performer, would they rather perform for one person or for 100 or 500 people? And I think all of them would say the more the better, because there's this thing called groupthink, where when you tell a joke or when you tell a story, one person begins to tie into that and feel the emotion, and somehow magically it transfers to the one sitting next to him or her, and it permeates the room. And when you're only talking to one person, that can be an issue, like we're doing now. So that's one of the obstacles. Another is the technology of itself. I mean, we had some music playing at the beginning. That was a hindrance to communication. When my wife, who's a successful attorney, I was sending her a text message about this and how excited I was about this event. And I said, I'm very excited about the webinar. Unfortunately, my phone didn't recognize the word webinar. And so the message she got was, I'm very excited about the wiener. So, you know, spell check is not necessarily our friend. You've all seen little things on Facebook or wherever where spell check has been an issue. So the technology is sometimes a positive tool and sometimes a hindrance. The key to storytelling is it's a human connection. It's interaction between, wow, that was weird. Ooh, like, it's an interaction between the person telling the story and the person who is hearing the story. And a goal, again, is to use this narrative to tap into the experiences and the emotion of the person listening in order to communicate the idea and to elicit a response, to get them to do something.
So Tom, real quick, we actually have a question that I think could fit in really well here.
Okay.
So Tina asked, she enjoys TED Talks tremendously. So thinking through the stories and the experiences, and I know Park, you've got a lot of experience there, but Tom, from a storytelling standpoint in TED Talks, why do you think TED Talks have become so popular? What are the tools that they're using that you just kind of outlined some of the tools? What are some of those things that really help you think make TED Talks resonate?
Well, I think the first thing is that the people listening are interested in the subject, because you have an opportunity to choose which lecture or which talk you want to hear. And so you're not going to tap into something that you aren't really interested in, at least on some level. So that automatically makes the person interested in the story. And then the stories themselves take sometimes a very complicated issue and put it in a way, or explain it in a way that that most of us can understand. I really enjoy watching TED Talks, and I was quite excited to hear that Park had worked with some presenters on telling stories. So I know now why some of them are so good, because he helped. It's a wonderful way to help people understand complex subjects in an understandable way, and it's I think they do an excellent job in telling their stories.
Well, and one that just came in, and this is interesting, and I know this is getting a little bit kind of out of our outline, and I definitely want to kind of come back to it. But in making that connection, and people are coming in a TED Talk because they want to listen to it. And Park, I definitely want to hear your kind of thoughts on that in a little bit. But Kristen, I believe this is Kristen Reed, one of our friends from Easter Seals at Houston, Texas, asked, so what happens if you don't know your audience? So I kind of want to tell a story that we talked about yesterday. This kind of brought that up. Park and Tom don't come from a Scrum world. Had y'all ever heard of Scrum really before?
I thought it was,
no, not at all.
Other than in rugby. And so I was going to them saying, hey, I've got this crazy idea. We want to reach out and I need to tell stories. So I wanted them to understand why it was important. So I told this story to them. This is actually a coaching situation I had recently, and we're working through, and this product owner is working with a team that works with collection agents. Talk about a job that, especially in the world we're in right now, is not very fun. And she's trying to make this connection between, you know, the pain that these customers. So she told the story of Anne, and Anne was a single mom, had 3 children, stressed out with that, trying to be, you know, her job was a collection agent for this company. She was coming in, and her job was to actually go and call people all day and reach out to people that, in a world of coronavirus and unemployment, you know, collection agents in general can't be very fun, but even now it's got to be more tough. And what she was trying to bring to that team of developers was a connection and empathy for someone whose job that is quite tough, and it can be quite disconnecting and stressful. And she was telling this story, and as the developers were hearing, they were able to get more empathetic and create better products. I was sharing this with Park and Tom so that they could understand the importance of what happens in the product world. So what, from a just skills, when you're trying to tell a story and you don't necessarily know your audience, what are y'all doing to kind of help work through this? Mark, why don't you kick off on this one? Sorry, just from a.
Yeah. So what I personally do is I imagine that I am talking to, who I'm talking to is people that I enjoy talking to, whether they're my friends, whether they're my colleagues, whoever. I imagine that I am kind of walking in their shoes. And I start with something that Chris just brought up, which is empathy, which is the idea, it's an imagination of likeness. And that comes from Dr. Dana Blackstone. And this imagination of likeness is just going beyond just, you know, talking to somebody. It's actually picturing why I'm talking to somebody and that we are instantly connected. I know it's weird being through Zoom, teaching classes through Zoom, coaching people through Zoom. Very weird. There's not much feedback, but I can imagine that I'm actually talking to somebody through this lens, through the glass, to quote Chris from yesterday. And I can imagine what it's like sitting on that other end. So it's the imagination of likeness, is that starting with that empathy. And just to sort of touch back on the TED Talk question, another really big thing that sets TED Talks apart is this idea of personal anecdote, being able to connect a personal story with what Tom said, big ideas. I recently worked on a TED Talk with this wonderful attorney based in Houston. And hers was all about the life lessons she learned while she was ironing her clothes. And we worked really hard to sort of iron out some of the creases. Yeah.
I'll give you props for that. You had to do that.
And we worked really hard to make that personal anecdote grow into something a bit more what we would deem universal, that can reach a broader audience. Thanks. I work on puns. So that's what makes TED Talks really successful. Like when you watch Brene Brown, for instance, there's a lot of personal connection there. And that's sort of what I'm going to talk about in my little like sort of toolkit. So how do we do that? How do we engage a storytelling thing? Tom talks so much about the elements of stories. So how do we do it? If you have nothing to start with, how do we do it? So I always start with something that we all have since we were babies: curiosity, being curious about something. An exercise that you can do for those playing the home game, go outside, wear a mask, wash your hands, go outside, go on a walk. And while you're on that walk, set a timer for 3 minutes. And on that 3-minute walk, notice everything that you hear, that you smell, that you see, that you taste, and you touch. Notice all the little details. Like Tom was saying, start to connect those details, those hearing, smelling, seeing, tasting words. And so when you say dog, you have a clear picture in that. That dog is personal to you. Other people's dogs are personal to them. But the minute you start to connect personally with your own dog, so to speak, you start to outline how to tell this story. So go on a walk. Set a timer for 3 minutes.
Yep. Tom's got he's doing the signal.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Any of my Scrum Mate friends will appreciate that.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to agree with everything you said, but I wanted to add, and I wanted to add one more thing to help answer her question. If you don't know your audience, you've got to do the research. You've got to tap into them, as Park was saying, in terms of imagining them as part of your family, as part of your group, so you can get that empathy going. But there's an old adage in sales that says, if you want to sell somebody something, find out what they want. And so if you need to talk to your group or to your customers about a specific idea or specific goal, just test the waters. Talk to an individual or two. Find out what they really think. Find out what they're really looking for. When I do a presentation for a group, it's usually about marketing or PR or something like that. But I have a questionnaire where I sit down and I ask them a series of questions, so I make sure that I'm giving them the information that they want and they need.
So Tom, I want to get back to you for just a little bit as you kind of wrap up, and I know you have power stories, so that connection. And Park, by the way, I still remember that 3-minute walk exercise. That was the very first exercise you had us do in that acting class at the Shakespeare Festival. And I can remember walking just in the neighborhood I lived in, and I still remember that walk. It's interesting how that connects. So Tom, in the power of kind of crafting that story and going through, you talked about communication, humor, playing to your strengths. What else do you have around that? I know, and especially there's a story you wanted to share.
Yeah, there's a story about Ernest Hemingway, who I think all of us can agree was a master storyteller. Hemingway apparently was sitting with several of his buddies, believe it or not, in a bar, talking about storytelling and writing. And they challenged each one to come up with the best short story they could in as few words as possible. And Hemingway actually won the bet with a 6-word story. And those 6 words were for sale, baby shoes, never worn. And that's a perfect example of how to tell a story. It's not detailed, it's not flowery in any, I can't say that word, but it's not in any way. It's an opportunity for you to feel, to imagine. And those 6 words certainly spark the imagination. We wonder what happened. Was the baby stillborn? Was there really no baby? They thought there was. Perhaps there was some problem with the pregnancy, or did the baby was she stolen at birth? I mean, there's so many different possibilities there, and the story doesn't limit those possibilities, but it does focus your imagination on an event, and that is great storytelling.
Thank you, Tom. So that power in starting somewhere, in part, that toolkit, the first story you can write, go out, take a 3-minute walk, and go through there. Park, what are some other techniques that you've learned, and especially as you coach different things, of how to actually deliver the story and work through that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways to start to familiarize yourself with your text or your story or your script that you're working with. Some of these come from some great people like Barbara Hausman and Cecily Berry, where you start off by just walking the sentences. Start from the top of the sentence, walk all the way to the period or the end stop, and then change directions. That way you start to understand kind of what Tom was talking about of the structure of the thought. So you go, oh, that's how that's structured. So you start there. The next thing is to look at the little minute changes in the sentence. So you start walking, and you start to turn on each punctuation mark. So every comma, semicolon, colon, and you start to realize that, ooh, this actually has a rhythm to the story. And you start to notice these rhythms. Then you can start to play with them. Ooh, what happens if I start to go faster here and then I slow it down? We do this in everyday life. You're like, oh, if you take example of your grocery list, you go, oh, I need carrots, I need peas, I need potatoes, and I need to pick up some veggie meals. So we start to elongate, and then we start to condense certain things based on rhythm and tempo. And this allows for a lot of fluidity in our voice. The next thing that really helps us with storytelling is breath. Our breath is what actually connects us to the rest of the world. If we start to breathe really, really shallow, and we start to breathe really up top, and you start to feel like, oh, somebody's out of control, actually, you're absolutely in control of your breath, and you can start to breathe, and that will actually place your listener, whether you know them or not, at ease. That you know that you have the expertise to do this. You all have your own expertise out there. All you need to do is just breathe and relax, and you know you have that own power. So breathing is just filling up like a drop of water into a barrel. So you breathe in, and the barrel expands, breathe out, and the barrel contracts. That's all it is. And when you walk those sentences, breathe at the start, at the sentence, and then finish on the period. That way your thoughts line up with what you want to do. On these little things, you can also change targets. And this can also show different opposing thoughts. Because we have things that we like. For instance, ooh, I really dislike this X product. I really dislike it. However, Y is really great. I really like this Y product. It's really great, but X. Ugh. So you notice that changing the targets as well helps with laying out opposition, or as Tom would so graciously put out there, conflict. There's a conflict between X product and Y product, and I am more for the Y product than the X product. So that's a really simple thing. Just opposition helps tell a cleaner story. Eye contact. I know it's weird on a camera. I know it is, but trying to focus directly into the lens, even as you're, looking at your notes or whatever, trying to focus directly into that lens and trying to be as clear as possible through that lens and through the listener. And eye contact is another thing that helps put people at ease, even though it can feel quite vulnerable at the time. I completely understand that. But when you're looking through a lens, you're actually looking through and connecting to another person, even when we're disconnected by 5,000 miles. So that's some really easy thing to do in this whole situation. And then finally, kind of what Tom touched on, what do you want the other person to do? What would that look like in the best possible solution? Would they hoist you up on their shoulders? Would they shake your hand? Will they give you a high five or an elbow bump? What would that look like? Or, would it cause a huge commotion? What would that actually look like if you achieved the goals you set out for yourself? So that's what I got.
Awesome, Park. Thank you. Tom.
There are a couple things I wanted to add. I think Park was right on target. And one of the things that I think is really exciting to use in storytelling, one of the tools is a pause. No sound, no words, no nothing. It helps to drive home the point. And I've had people, actors especially, ask me, well, how long do I pause? And my answer is always, you wait until it's uncomfortable and then you wait a second longer, because that allows the audience to absorb and to think and to kind of just, and it breaks up the rhythm. And Park pointed out correctly that changing your rhythm, changing your speed helps keep people interested. If you just talk like the guy from Ferris Bueller, you know, all the time, then you're gonna, if your goal is to put them to sleep, you'll succeed. But if your goal is to have something else, or communicate something else, then changing your rhythm and changing your pattern and looking for those conflicts that Park was talking about are essential to good storytelling.
Absolutely. I'm on mute. And absolutely, the pause, the being okay with silence, and doing those kinds of things when I'm teaching classes. Sometimes that's, you know, we practice this. There's a term, 3 before me, or and what that means is pause and you give space for someone else. And what you're doing is you're allowing them to get a little bit uncomfortable so that they actually respond and see that connection there. And I love that. And it can be so uncomfortable. We're not good with silence. The silence is scary at times, but being okay with it. I love that thought. And Park, I'm flashing back to a lot of the skills and things when you're talking about this, the walking the sentence. I can remember being in an auditorium or a gymnasium, it looked like, at the Shakespeare Festival in Montgomery, Alabama. And actually literally, you know, a class full of students, we were literally walking, and at each comma, parenthesis, each period, we were turning in different directions and running into each other. It was so great. Really cool. And so the power of these toolkits, connecting, telling the story of the people that you want to connect to. And I tell this analogy that I use is the Jane Goodall and the power that she did in moving kind of the working in the gorillas in the rainforest. And we hear her story, and I can remember seeing that story growing up, thinking, oh, that was so cool. And she went out there and she lived and she watched and she observed and she learned. And sometimes we have to do that, and going out there, learning, watching, observing. That's something as product owners, that's kind of the role. And so if I bring it back to when I'm thinking back through the last months, the kinds of things that I've had to coach and the situations I see where I can pull from this knowledge, such as don't have the Q&A screen up when someone asks about the webinar or the wiener, and I get completely distracted. Pulling back from these skills and being able to help coach and train. So the observation, the getting out there, the walking, the observing, the just doing the silent walk. If you're a product owner, go do the silent walk with your customers. Just observe. Don't go to add, go to just learn and take those notes. Observe the situation and all of the sensory emotions. Come back, write that down, and crystallize it into something that's engaging for your team. When I was in Montgomery, one thing we did, I worked with a project that built a system to help get food assistance and Medicaid and different things. We wanted to tell the story. So we had a team that actually went out, and on screens throughout the floor of the building we were in, we actually had stories that were written that actually told, here's the story of the single mom that just lost her job, the father that was working in a factory for his entire life and the factory got shut down. And here's where these people are connecting. So that way, when your team is walking around, they're connected to it. They know why. And we know that understanding why, Simon Sinek talk about a great TED Talk, starting with why. And making that connection, this is why we exist, is so important. And bringing that back to understand, to build innovation and get more insight is what we're trying to do. And these are the skills that help. I want to put a little bit before we wrap today, and there's so much more. There's so much more we can dive into. We want to get into this. We want your feedback on if this is something we need to continue, but I want to make it a little bit of a challenge to you. And a lot of this is going to come from what we have already talked about. And I'm going to skip forward a little bit. By the way, I did have, and we'll send this out, the empathy quote. Empathy is the imagination of likeness. being able to imagine walking in others' shoes. Compassion is the act of having empathy. Park talked about that. But I want to talk about 3 things I don't want to leave you with. Become uncomfortable. You want to get good at this, you have to, this isn't something that's easy to do. These are skills, you got to put yourself out there. And you're not necessarily going to be great at it, but do the thing that stretches you, do the thing that makes you uncomfortable. And I like to tell this, so if you are a Scrum Master, a product owner, a leader, or you're in front of a room of any kind, your energy level, your compassion, your empathy, the floor, your bottom of where you are when you're in front of that room or when you're trying to inspire and lead and motivate a team, your bottom energy level is going to be the ceiling of that team. And I see that time and time again. So if you want to inspire and motivate, get uncomfortable, do the thing that makes you feel goofy. But keeping in mind that you also need to be genuine. You're going to stretch yourself, make yourself feel uncomfortable, but be who you are. Go back and do it from a place of empathy. To Tom, you know, play to your strengths. When he talked about, you know, are you good at humor? Humor's great. Sometimes you not being good at humor, if you're self-aware of that, you can even use that to bring the room down. So be genuine and start messy. Start messy. This stuff takes time. Park, how long have you been working at this?
Let's see. I started working professionally when I was 17.
Wow.
So
2 years.
And that's professionally.
Some years. So
Yes, I like to say I started programming in 3rd grade, so that means I have a whopping 10 years experience, right? When was the first time, when did you write your first play?
Actually, I was kind of late coming to the playwriting. I've been writing short stories and songs and stuff like that for years, but my first play was about 11 years ago. It was an epic Shakespearean sort of thing called The Wedding from Hell.
Nice.
No, it wasn't Shakespearean at all. It was very just as it sounds.
Talked about the duality of man, right?
Yeah, exactly. The duality of man.
I was on that webinar last night. That part.
Yeah, we had a great time with that. But you're absolutely right. You've got to be a little bit uncomfortable. I mean, even though I've been doing this a long time, it's still a little bit uncomfortable when you're talking to people about something that you've done for years. But the goal here is to help those folks who are tuned in to, you can tell how old I am, I'm using tuned in, to learn to tell stories, to be better storytellers. And so that's our goal. And although we don't have time to go into all the specifics today, I hope that you've gotten something out of it and that it sparks a curiosity and a desire to become a better storyteller, that it shows you the power of a story and what you can accomplish over sending a dry memo. If you can tell a story, you can bring people to action, and that's something that is certainly would be good for your company or for whatever you're looking to do within your personal or professional life.
Park.
Yeah, I just sort of want to respond to Adrian's question about what if somebody's looking for their own personal way of storytelling. I absolutely encourage people to watch YouTube, TED Talks, whatever. Find people who you like and who you like their style of storytelling, and then try it out. Trial and error. Do it in your, make a fool out of yourself. Who cares? Do it in your own apartment. I remember always trying to like impersonate my favorite comedians and trying it out, just trying out what they did and seeing if I liked how it worked with me. Try it out. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. There's a million different other styles of storytelling out there. Keep trying, keep experimenting, and keep remaining curious about how you're telling your story.
I absolutely love that. In fact, Tom and Park, I think this is going to be a perfect segue into a challenge. We don't want to leave it here. We want to act. We want to ask you to stretch yourself, to make yourself uncomfortable. So we want to offer you some coaching and an opportunity to potentially win a free class from Sagayo, any class we have coming up. But here's what we're going to ask you to do. So in this challenge, we're challenging you now. So this is a challenge. We need you to accept it. First, create a story. Maybe it's the 2-minute walk. Go out, walk, write down what you experience, the sensory emotions. Maybe you're going to tell the story of someone you worked with. Be creative. To Park's point, find someone that you like, that you respect. Maybe it's a TED Talk. Maybe it's a comedian. Write a story. Get in front of your webcam. The world has been much more used to being on Zoom, and that you can use Zoom to do this. There's lots of ways. Please reach out if you need help in this, and we can absolutely point you in the direction. Use your webcam and record a 2-minute video of yourself telling this story. Post it on social media with the hashtag Scrum Stories, and make sure you tag Sagayo, and we'll give you all the links and all that stuff. Don't worry about that now. But Scrum Stories. And what we're going to do, we're going to be looking out for that. We're going to give you feedback on that and say, hey, here's how you can get it better. The only way we get better is we try. We start messy, we make ourselves uncomfortable, and then we get feedback from people that have done this. And then we'll give that feedback. And from everyone that participates in this activity, we're going to give a free class from Sagayo that you'll be able to pick. And we've got several coming up, a whole schedule. These are social media. Don't worry about that now. You can take a picture, but we'll also make this available. We did a little bit of Q&A. Please post if there's any additional questions. We'll try to get at it, but we are a little bit on our time, so I want to watch our time box real quick. For those that attended this webinar or are watching it in the on-demand version, for the June, actually this is July. I did not change that date. This is actually July 27th through July 30th, so please ignore that June date. We have our next cohort of the Scrum Master training class. If you use the code Stories Make the World, we'll give you a 20% discount on your class registration. If you do that actually before, I think it's end of this week, that will actually be added into the early bird discount. So you'll get it at a phenomenal still. In the Scrum Master course, we talk about how do you inspire a team and how do you build that forward. Some of you that have joined this because of the broad range might not be doing Scrum. This is something you can apply in your own life to get better. We have a lot of people that have gone through and can tell stories about the experience and going through this class. Something I absolutely love doing. Is one of the highlights that I get to go and get the honor of teaching this class. We believe there's going to be others, and we're going to get feedback from you, and hopefully there should be more if you want to hear, but let's remind you about your Start Messy challenge. Write your own story, 2 minutes or less, record yourself telling this story, post it on social media with the hashtag Scrum Stories, tag Sagayo, and we'll give you coaching and feedback on that and the opportunity to win a free class. I've spoken fast, talk about tempo. I apologize if that was a little bit too fast. If we have any English as a second language people, I hope the rest of this was helpful there. I hope all of this is helpful. But what I want to do is I'm going to stop sharing. We're going to send this out in a recap email so you don't have to remember it all now. Anyone that's hanging around, and we still have a pretty decent sized room, let's just open it up. We've got a few minutes before our next thing. Tom, Park, are we good for a few minutes?
Absolutely.
Yeah, good to go.
All right, if there are questions that we didn't answer, put them out there. One thing I think you said that everyone who posts a hashtag will get a free class, but I think you mean just one person. An opportunity, one person. Yes, thank you for that, Tom. That clarification. Yes, I know Amanda all of a sudden is having a heart attack in the background that we just gave away a bunch of free classes. Yeah, one opportunity, but that is could be up to, depending on which class you take, like a $2,000 opportunity. So Leah asks, this is probably a leading question, but do you feel being an avid reader can help someone be a great storyteller or a better storyteller? Absolutely. It's not a guarantee, of course, but if you read a book and you develop a story from that, you automatically have some feeling that it's a positive story, that it's a worthwhile story because it was published in a book. So yeah, it helps to spark your imagination. One thing that I didn't mention is it's okay to lie when you're telling a story. You can fabricate things. You don't want to lie about facts, but you certainly can say, you know, my grandfather was an avid fisherman and blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe he never left New York City, and the closest he got to fishing was the market down on the corner where he went to buy his groceries. It's okay to expand, to elaborate in order to try to make your point. Some people have a little bit of an issue doing that, but it's something that I think reading a book, using that imagination can definitely help you.
Absolutely. I love
Yeah,
parks,
I mean,
learning.
I also will kind of say yes, and an avid reader. As a dyslexic, I know sometimes words can be hard. So I also think listening to stories, the world of podcasts have opened that up wonderfully. So not only just reading stories, I completely agree with what Josh has written in the chat. The written word forces you to create your own visuals, but so does the spoken word. And I think listening to stories is really important too. Yeah, so.
Music is a great example of that. If you can't find somebody telling a story just with their words, listen to music. The music that affects you personally, that's the kind of story you want to tell.
You know, something I do when we made this transition, I taught in front of a classroom, in front of the flesh. When I'm behind the glass, things change and you lose a lot of context. Park and Tom, you both talked about this. Something I did is I started looking, I told a story, and the first time I did a virtual class, and we had a very short time to do it. And I told a story that had a joke, and usually it's a joke. I tell this joke all the time. It's just the joke I tell at this particular point in the content. And I always get, at least some courtesy chuckles, if not actual laughs. I didn't get any of that because everyone was on mute. We were being good Zoom meeting attendees. And it felt so weird. I watched two different things. I watched Stephen Colbert. I actually watched a lot of different things, but I watched Stephen Colbert, who I used to think was really funny. And he was doing it, and the way he's delivering it is he would just tell the joke and put the joke out there. And he put it out there, and then it was like, really isn't that funny? Because no one's laughing. You don't get that group think that Tom talked about. Saturday Night Live, watching them, they're interesting and they're doing a lot of this. They unmute themselves and they actually, and this is completely planned, like they did this absolutely on purpose. You hear everyone else laugh. SNL, when I watched it before, sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's kind of like, it's okay. I hope I don't offend any big SNL fans out there. But they were just much better at it. And so what I did was I was learning, so what are the things I could learn from the people that are doing this for a living and trying that. So it's some of the same stuff there. Kristen asks, what advice would you give someone who thinks their story is not worth telling or would not be of interest to others?
Well, if you think it's not worth telling, the people listening aren't going to think it's worth hearing. You've got to find a way to make that story applicable to the people you're talking to. You have to believe in the story. If you didn't have a grandfather who fished, but you want to do a story about a grandfather who fished in order to bring home an emotion, then you have to believe that your grandfather was a fisherman. When Chris played a character in The Glass Menagerie and had to sing, he had a fear of singing. He didn't feel like he could do a good job as a singer. And it was a hurdle until we talked about the fact that he doesn't have to be a good singer. That's not part of the character. He's just using that as a tool to communicate, the character communicate. You have to believe in your own stuff or nobody else will believe it either.
Yeah, and I'll sort of piggyback onto that. You are the expert of your own lived experience. So if you feel like it's important, it'll be important. And if you are personalizing this story, you will also find ways to make that story unique to you. You have a lot of power in the way we tell stories and the way each and every one of you tells a story. And that power is your own unique lived experiences. And I think that's really important to point out. You may not feel like but people will be interested. Another big thing about storytelling is we either tell stories to show a mirror back to people or a window to see into something else. So that's something to think about. So I will encourage you to continue to tell your own story, your unique story.
You might actually be surprised that your story does resonate with your listeners. In a play I wrote, I sort of recanted or recalled a story about my visiting a barber. And during that time of my life, I was having some real issues with some stuff, and I didn't feel very connected to people, and I hadn't had a lot of interaction with people. So I went to this barber for a haircut, and this guy was so meticulous and so caring, and I hesitate to use this word, but he was very loving about the way he cut my hair. He took his time. He was very engaged in the process. And at the end of the haircut, I went out into my car and I sat there and I cried. And I wanted to tell that story as part of this play, as part of the character in this play, but I was afraid to on a number of levels. One, I thought somebody may take away my man card. I also thought that I was the only person in the world who'd ever had this experience. After a reading of my play, a friend of mine came up to me and told me that the exact same thing had happened to her, that she had been going through a rough patch. She went to get her hair cut. The stylist was caring and touched her literally and emotionally. And so she could relate to it. So you might, Park's right. You might be surprised at the people who can relate to your story, but you have to believe in it for them to understand it and for it to communicate.
One of the roles is product owner, and so back to Anne, the collection agent. Collection agents that doesn't seem like a very emotional, engaging job. No one wants to get called by a collection agent. But telling the story of the stress that it was causing her, of the pain that she had to deal with every day, and she's worried about being at home and then coming to work, and now she's having to call people and being afraid to call to say, hey, I need you, knowing the situation that they very well could be in, given the world we're in. Having empathy for someone that a lot of times we might consider the bad guy, the antagonist in a story, I think was very interesting. And making that connection, and something I tell a lot of product owners is, it doesn't really matter what your product is. It could be the most dull, dry thing. If you're doing this right, so we build systems that solve problems for people. And when we understand those problems from the perspective of the person, back to Jane Goodall, watching, animals in the rainforest, like for years and observing them, that could get very boring. But she told their story, and she told it anyway. And people learned, and we learned, and we became better as a society because of that. So tell your story and make that connection and help your team understand, your real problems. And you can make that connection because it matters, and it will inspire your teams. And again, it doesn't really matter how dry you might feel the product is. If you tell it, and to Tom's point, I absolutely love that. Like if you believe it matters, the people listening will believe it matters.
I'm old, so I know all the old sayings. And one of the old sales adages is, if you can't solve a problem, sell it as a feature. And so you're exactly right, Chris. If you want to see that in action, I love the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And in that movie, John Candy shows you how to be an excellent salesperson for shower curtain rings. And if you can sell shower curtain rings, then by gosh, you can sell, you know, whatever widget that you've got. If you believe in your product and you see it as a solution to a problem, then you can tell a story about it, and you can tell a story. You know, a great source for stories for products are your customers. Find out, you know, talk to your customers, ask them how your product solved their problem. And I'd bet you dollars to donuts that within a short period of time, you'll find a client who can tell a story about how it changed your product, helped them change their life, improve their business, increase their profits, did something that can help you tell that story, retell that story. Then you might need to combine a couple of different stories from your clients into one story to show how your product or service is something that is beneficial to your audience.
So it looks like the popcorn is not popping as much anymore. Does anyone, last call for questions? Lots of thank you. I'm so glad we have people that are sticking into the very end. That's great. I hope this seems helpful based on the feedback. We hope it continues to be helpful. This is something that we're very passionate about and would love to see continue and really unpack this more. But I hope this was enough to get you started. Cannot wait to see your stories. Please remember the challenge. Get messy, start messy, and put yourself out there. Get some feedback, will help you get a little better. And then looking forward to seeing everyone in future classes. For those that are watching after the fact on the on-demand part of this, looking forward to having you also participate. We're going to be looking and watching those hashtags and looking forward to the next time we get together. Tom, Park, thank you very much for joining from Wetumpka, Alabama, and from London, England, and me in Birmingham, Alabama, and my team. Thank you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you next time, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.